Today we complete the slides for work transitions and talk about moving.
This is like a week.
They just paid no attention to you at all.
I know that we always, I know that most of us pray about these worship services and classes at other times, but why don't we just take a moment just to pray, because we always need God so much. So let's pray. Our God in heaven, we thank you so much for your great love that is always around us, always lifting us up. In our weakness, you are strong, and we thank you that you have shown your strength in so many ways. We ask you to show it now. We ask you to do this for your glory and for the people here and for all your people, all the people in the world I know you care about. God, I pray that you'll help them all and guide us all in following your will and our transitions to do with working and moving and other things that people here are facing. We pray for all of this through Jesus. Amen. Moving. There's so much in common between all these transitions, and so as we were practicing, Diane and I last night, and I had taken the remaining work slides, and Diane had taken the moving slides, and I noticed quite a lot of similar themes, and I think that's good. The repetition is good, and it helps us to let things sink in. And another thing that we're really not really qualified to talk about is experiencing death of our loved ones, because we've had so few of our loved ones leave us. Diane has more than I have when she was, but I feel like there's a lot here, especially when it comes to the moving, that has parallels with death too. So, about work transitions. Work changes fast. I know a lot of you have experienced this in various fields. I have in my fields that I've been involved with in like mission work. I felt like I was constantly reinventing myself. At the beginning, it's about language and culture learning, and then trying to build relationships, be part of the community, and then there's church planting, and then there's being mentor for other church planters, and it's just always changing. And then I got into web development, which I am in now, and wow, if you don't keep up with the latest trends, you're just left behind. It's just constantly changing, and I know a lot of fields are like that. Here's a little Far Eastern wisdom from the mouth of Bruce Lee. Notice that the stiffest tree is most easily cracked, while the bamboo or willow survives by bending with the wind. And we ask ourselves, can I do it? Can I keep learning? Can I keep changing? Can I keep making it through all these transitions? And the answer is yes, that you can. God does give you the power to be successful. Don't get tired of doing what's good. You will reap a harvest at the right time if you don't give up. So just prepare your mind for learning. Believe that God can help you to do it, and persevere in learning. Talking about, did you have anything else to say about that, Diane? Okay, talking about when to create a transition for yourself. This family we know, us, worked as missionaries from 2001 to 2014. When do you think they started to consider wrapping it up?
2001.
Yes, every year they were there. All right. Because when you feel restless, it could lead to a good change or to a reaffirmation of what you're doing. So that restless feeling can be a good process, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a change, right? Process with prayer, looking for God's wisdom, of course. Living for yourself, you will fail and be unhappy. So, work is such an important part of our lives, but it's not just to fulfill ourselves. Because if it is, it's totally going to backfire, right? We talked last week about purpose of work and meaning of work, and how it's to reflect God, and it's to help people. And yes, if you do those things, it is fulfilling. And we thank God for that. It's very fulfilling to have work. But not just for selfishness alone. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad to love yourself, but if you just do it for yourself, you're going to think, oh, this work is going to make me happy, and then you're idolizing. You're making it an idol, right? You're thinking that if I just have the right job, or if I just have this certain particular job, that is somehow going to make me happy, when really all work is glorifying God. And so we can do dishes, and it's not menial. We can do laundry, and it is reflecting God, and it's helping people, and it's fulfilling because it's helping us to be what God created us to be.
Definitely, you have to be in the right frame of mind.
Right, yeah.
Could you kind of amplify that second point? Because you guys have been through a lot of transition, a lot of us have, and all that. And just kind of, you appropriately kind of like, so yeah, of course you process with prayer and wisdom, but just can you amplify sort of y'all's process and
Okay, so he's asking us, and anyone can help, to expand on that second bullet point of processing with prayer and looking for God's wisdom. So that's a great question. And it's similar to some questions that were asked last week, too. So I'll start off by saying one thing that I do is every morning as part of my prayers, as when I get to in the Lord's Prayer where it says, "Your will be done," I use that opportunity to do what Jesus said about taking up your cross every day, by giving up everything to God and saying, "God, everything that I want, I give it up to you. Everything that I have, I give it up to you. Not my will, yours be done." Just trying to detach myself from everything except loving God and just trusting Him for what He needs. And that really, I think that helps us to have clarity and to hear God's voice. Another thing is just asking God for wisdom. And James says that if you ask, God is generous. He loves to give. He won't find fault as He tries to give. If anyone asks for wisdom, even if they don't deserve it, God is very happy to give wisdom to everybody. Another key thing, I believe, is the love commands. Jesus talked about loving God with all your heart and loving people as you love yourself. And I believe that you can never say that God hasn't told you what to do, because that love command touches everything that we do, right? If you can't find specific wisdom from God about the situation you're facing, you can think about love and you can find direction. And really, if God didn't make a rule about it, so like, what if I have two paths in front of me and they're both loving? If God wants to tell me which one to do, He can tell me. He's very powerful. If He hasn't told me which one to do, it's because He doesn't have a rule about it. He's giving me freedom, right? And if we do make a choice out of love for God and love for people, that is the right choice. And there might be other right choices, but what you're doing is the right choice, because that's what God cares about. He cares about that love. Love means that you are opening yourself up to God and to people, that you're talking to Him about it, that you're trying to, read the Bible and learn what you can from God. Love means that you are appreciating God, that you are praising Him and wanting to be like Him, wanting to honor Him, wanting others to love Him. Love means that you are passionate about pleasing God, that you are so excited about that, the fact that you can please God, and that He is looking at you and caring about you, and that He you can join in his excitement about the things that he's excited about. So I would say that's a good start. Any other thoughts about how to process with prayer and looking for God's wisdom?
One of my big prayers is if I'm in these times of turmoil or decision, God, just make it obvious. He has a way of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just different things. And sometimes
Voice of experience here. Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you have to make the little list,
Right.
pros and cons and things like that. But God really does show you or gives you hints
Right.
Which way to go.
Mm-hmm. And part of it is just trusting him after the fact, right? I mean, that when you make your decision and then you end up somewhere else that you didn't intend to be, you just have to know that God, the God who made us, the God who did all these incredible things that we see around us every day, loves us, and he is guiding us. Yeah.
Did you and Diane talk about being missionaries before you got married?
We did, yeah. Did you have anything else to say about that? Okay, well, that is going to, that's going to come up in another slide too, I believe. Yeah, and as we process with prayer and looking for God's wisdom, we also need to consider the people around us, because that's part of God's wisdom too, right? So like Diane and I, God's joined us together, and what God has joined together, people shouldn't separate. There are stories of famous missionaries who have left their families behind, and it didn't really work out well most of the time, which we need to certainly be willing to lose everything, including our families, for God, but that doesn't mean we need to destroy our families intentionally.
I know when we lived in Alabama, and when we got married and we moved to Oklahoma, my parents thought we were moving to the jumping off place of the world.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah.
Didn't think about moving halfway around.
Right.
I'll just say that, sometimes you may make a choice that seems reckless, that feels like the loving choice, or feels like the wise choice with the wisdom of God, but maybe not necessarily that's going to make you the most money, or that's going to necessarily make you seem the most successful. And sometimes people are going to say something about that. They're going to be like, shouldn't you be making a more sensible choice? And we've made some of those choices, and people have said, what about your kids? What about this? What about that? Shouldn't you be... And
don't take your baby to that jungle.
Yeah. And sometimes I just trusted to the kindness and discipline of God, and just said, this seems like the right way. I know that I can deceive myself, and I know that that's possible, that I'm tricking myself. But if I am, I also trust you to be a God that disciplines and corrects, because you are that kind of father. You are that kind of loving father that isn't just going to let me just go off on some crazy, stupid path without saying something about it, that God is a kind, loving God. And sometimes I've just thrown myself on his mercy and said, would you correct this along the way? This is what I'm doing. We prayed about it. I don't hear an audible voice. I was thankful that Lori mentioned that last week. I don't hear an audible voice, but I'll think to myself, just seems like this is the most loving path, the most faithful path, the path that is going to serve God the best. And it doesn't seem to make sense to a lot of people, but would you just throw roadblocks or shut doors or do whatever that you do, correct me along the way, and teach me if I need to know something better.
That's so good.
Teach me if I'm not aware of something that I should be aware of in this situation, and then just go ahead and make your decision, because you can throw yourself on that mercy of God and trust him to take care of that. You don't have to be paralyzed with fear. I didn't hear an audible voice, so I can't make a choice,
Yes.
Go forward.
I've known someone who honestly would just, he would just, what's wrong?
I'm going to take the mic.
Okay. Yeah, I've known someone who was seriously paralyzed, and he was hurting all the people around him because he was waiting for God's direction. When God has given us direction, God has told us to love, and so that means we can't wait forever to make the decisions. We've got to take some time, don't rush it, but do make a decision eventually, because that is pleasing God and that is obeying God, and if you don't, you're not obeying God.
When we got married, Kathy married me because the other guy that she had been dating was going to go into the mission field, and she didn't think she could go into the mission field. And then 4 years later, or 2 years.
She might have had some other reasons
He
too.
went, the other guy went to Europe for 4 years. And then we went to the third world country for 13. So God somehow directs you back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. If
Yeah.
nothing else, I hope that if nothing else, you can leave this class knowing that God is good, that He's faithful, that He loves you, that you can trust Him.
Yeah.
If you're living with that in mind, I think you're going to make a good choice.
Yeah. And we'll get back to this topic actually on another slide too. But so work is a blessing and a gift from God, but we can't use it as an idol or make it a God in itself, right? Same with leisure. We have to realize that our life is not all about, getting enough money so we can retire and not work anymore, or so that we can, just pay enough just so we can, ski or play video games or whatever it is that we think we're living for, because those things will also disappoint, right? If they are our God, if that's where we think we're getting our happiness. So, feeling sorry, someone over there is really craning his head. All right, the average person born in the latter years of the baby boom held 11.7 jobs. Our kids were like, how can you hold 11.7 jobs?
It's like 1.7 of a job.
Okay, there you go. And is getting to around 4 jobs, a job every 4 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And here's someone that I interviewed for a position in the company where I work just last week or the week before. These are the years when he changed jobs.
Kind of looks like Jack Young's
Right?
So he didn't miss a year since 2010 of changing a job. He's trying to get one this year. So obviously this is a red flag for employers, though many will still consider this person. So we did consider him. He didn't get the job, but question for this person: did you learn from your transitions, or did you keep transitioning to avoid learning? That's a key question, right? Mm-hmm. Because in every transition, God has a purpose for us, but it's possible for us to use transitions to avoid those issues, and then they just keep coming up again, and we blame others, right? We say, oh, another stupid workplace, and we're never growing past those problems that are causing us to lose our job every time, or whatever it may be.
There's an inner transition that is a higher calling than the outer transitions that God is calling us to. And if you're using change to avoid that inner growth, then that's the wrong use of transition.
Right.
And it's not a real transition at all. It's just an outer one.
So just to speak from my very recent experience, I graduated and then I just took a job out of necessity, and it was not in my field or anything, and I had so many times where I was so frustrated with it, and so and so there were just so many times I was discontent. I hated working there. I was I'm not getting paid enough for my work. No one recognizes me. And I knew at the time I wasn't in the right mindset, but I'd look for other jobs maybe that paid more or whatever, and never found anything. And it wasn't until I became perfectly content with where I was at that God literally dropped a new opportunity in my lap. And I think if I had have just tried to jump ship quicker, I wouldn't have learned that what you've been saying, work is not about me. It's not about how much I'm being recognized or how much I'm getting paid. It's about working for the Lord. And I would have never learned that if I had have just jumped to something else.
That's so good.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's an experience a lot of us have had of once we finally become content with not getting something, that's when maybe we're ready to get it. So thanks for that. Yeah, and by the way, I'm not trying to judge this person, and I'm not trying to judge anybody who has a lot of transitions. I'm just wanting us to ask the question of ourselves. That's all, right? So and this is that slide I was talking about of getting back to the topic of finding direction. This is from Timothy Keller, a really good author. How with my existing abilities and opportunities can I be of greatest service to other people, knowing what I do of God's will and of human need? Now, if you just take the last half of that question, then as we all grow in knowledge, then we'll all come closer and closer to the same occupation, right? But if you look at the first half, that's where it's really going to be different for everybody with my existing abilities and opportunities. And and if that means that you are flipping burgers or whatever it means, that is totally fine. That is God honoring, and that is fulfilling, and that is worthwhile, and that is awesome, and there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, we need to look at, as we're trying to see where God is leading us, one thing we need to look at is where we've been and how God has prepared us through each stage of our lives and through each experience we've had, right? And it's exciting to see God's power at work in your life, to see through all those times that were so frustrating, to see that God is bringing something good out of it, that God is making you into an incredible tool, an incredible vessel, an incredible gifted person that is unlike anybody else in the world. And so it's good to trace that picture of the direction God has been leading you so that you can take your place in this next stage as you try and serve God and serve people. And as we do that, let's remember that sometimes we think, oh, God has prepared me for this path, and then it doesn't work out. Does that mean that you failed to do what God asked you to do? Our only goal is, does anyone know what the end of this verse is? To please God. That is something that you can always, always do. Whether
being content and
yes,
your situation.
yes.
Yes.
I mean, you might believe that God has prepared you to be, a preacher, and you think that is the way that you want to serve God because you think that's the best. And maybe it is for you. And then you get thrown in prison. Can you still please God? You can. No matter what they do to you, you can always please God, right? That's the one thing that God requires of you and the one thing you can always do.
This may not be recording either. Like I'm uncomfortable. Because you referenced Corinthians, and 1 Corinthians talks about the body. One of the things that I think is a challenge for us in our culture is it's so individually oriented. And we've talked kind of so far today. And one of the things, and maybe this is a direction you guys might want to go, maybe a slide on this later, but I think that part of our calling from God is, He calls us to be a part of His body. And I might be a big toe, you might be the head, so on and so forth. And as we kind of think about God's will and our purpose and all that, is to not just think individualistically as like where does God taking me, is where's God taking His people,
right? And
what is my role within that overall collective community context?
That is so true.
And I just think that's an important part of this whole work conversation. And it's true with your secular, if you have a secular job as well. It's like, hey, what is my role here as a Christ follower within this entity? And there's an evangelistic component to that, but there's more.
Yes, that's so good.
Absolutely.
That is so true. And I mentioned this about pleasing God because there are interruptions, but I believe that ultimately God will help us all to be part of a really awesome team, and we'll be productive, I believe, in heaven and even here on earth. But when there's interruptions, we can realize that this is still our real goal. And an example of ending a job, let's see, this is from Nehemiah. During the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. So he was the steward and this is a very high position. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So he's not the kind of person that's just constantly discontented and wanting change. So the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified. Okay, because he's about to tell the king why he's upset, and he knows that he's going to be asking for a job change. And he's afraid the king's not going to like it, perhaps. I don't know. But I replied, "Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." Our ministry flows from what burdens us, from the burdens that God has put in our hearts.
Absolutely.
The king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." So prayer is part of it. You can't really say that you're loving God if you never talk to him at all, right? And he's able to just keep God as a part of his everyday experiences, and to show that reliance on God, and God works. And God worked in his situation. God helped the king to feel kindly to support his new goal for his future career. So, if you believe the change is coming, don't think that managing the time and the stuff is enough. So you think, oh well, okay, I've got my checklist, and I've got everything worked out of where I'm going to be and how I'm going to pay for everything. But what about processing the transition inside yourself, right? That's a huge part of it, and helping others to understand too. So help yourself and others to understand why. Just telling people what's going to happen is not enough. And just telling yourself what's going to happen is not enough. You need to process why, like Nehemiah did, helping the king to understand, first of all, that he's sad because the city is in ruins. And then the king was able to say, well, what can I do to help? Because the king had that sense of empathy and could understand the sadness that Nehemiah was going through. So that's a really big part of helping yourself and others through your work transitions or any transitions. Don't check out mentally before it's time, because that's going to mess up the future that you're hoping for. Yeah.
How do you not check out mentally? If you know the change is coming, I'd like to hear how people don't check out mentally. Because when we've moved, and I know we're moving, I kind of check out mentally from whatever I'm doing there, even friendships, because I know I'm leaving those.
Yes.
And so that's a hard one.
Yes, it is hard. Yeah. And I'm not saying that it's, I'm not saying that there's not an element of that is healthy. I mean, there is some element of looking forward, but...
No, we disciplined ourselves. I think our last 2 years of mission work, almost every day I thought to myself, finish well, finish well. I just had to constantly keep it in mind, because I knew it was a temptation. I knew it was a temptation to not finish well, because we were already thinking forward. And so I think part of it is just that inner discipline, and knowing that it's a temptation, knowing that it's something that you might be tempted to do.
I've had a couple of experiences with this, one good, one bad, with regard to the checking out thing. And for me, I think what it came down to was how I had been cultivating relationships before that point. The job that I left when I moved to Denver from Austin, I'd been working at for a long time. I had a really good relationship with my boss, and I was happy there. I would have stayed there if we hadn't needed to move for my family's health. And so out of respect for him and out of wanting to do things the right way, I made sure when I left that I worked right up till the end to get all of my projects done and closed out. And that was because of how I felt about my boss. He and I had a really good relationship, and I was kind of sad to leave that behind.
Yeah.
Now I've had a job up here where things were not a good working environment, and I discovered that more as things went along. And I did start looking for a job, and I did start checking out mentally. And I probably would have quit at some point, except that my company beat me to it and ended the relationship. And so I know which way of leaving I prefer.
Right. Thank you. That's good insights. Yeah. So I'm sure there's a lot more to your question, but I'll go ahead and move on. So leaving things in order, and this is part of the same thing. And I think what he said kind of helped to answer your question in terms of letting love fill your heart for the people, and also just realizing that it's really that future you're looking forward to is not going to be as good if you've left a mess behind, right? So I won't talk much about this next two, about taking time to affirm, reconcile, thanking God. I'll talk more about that in moving, but don't pretend that your change is ideal or unbearable. So like you were saying, some changes we don't really want, and we can think it's unbearable. We can just not see that there's any good in it, but there is good in it, and we need to accept that. Other changes we're so excited about that we're not willing to look at anything bad about it, and that's going to set us up for failure too. So we need to be willing to count the cost of everything and realize there is a cost, and it's gonna hurt at times, and there's going to be things that we miss, and so those are important parts of ending. So we talked about ending, and really, we talked about these three parts of transitions every time, how you end something, then you have this kind of neutral zone, and then a new beginning. But the word then is really not right, and that's why I kind of changed it a little bit this time, just so that you can see like that they're really, all of them are happening all through any transition. At the beginning of a transition, there's more ending issues, but when you get to the beginning, you may find that there's certain things you haven't let go of, and you have to still continue to say goodbye and end those things to keep your, so the ending goes all the way through, and also the beginning goes all the way through in the neutral zone too. So here, I think I have an example here. Yeah, our next example is something that is an ending, and at the beginning, and it's a neutral zone at the same time, and that is Joseph, his first 7 years of leading in Egypt. Because he had known through God's help that there was going to be 7 years of good harvest, and then 7 years of famine. And so as soon as he entered this job and he had this new beginning, it was already a transition time. It was already a neutral zone of temporary things, and he set up temporary structures to take care of it. So as predicted, for 7 years the land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. And so this took a lot of infrastructure. It took a lot of new ways of doing things, and they're not going to last. They're just for that temporary time period. And the same is true for all of us as we're going through transitions, even at work, even if you're not changing jobs, but there's maybe just a big change at work, and there's this in-between time where everything's confused. You might need to set up some temporary structures for dealing with that. Those are important. At last, the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end. Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. And people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. So if you only think about the old and the new, the end and the beginning, you miss a lot because there's something in the middle there. There's these temporary needs, so prepare for them. The mid-transition time is great for learning and creativity, and often one improvement allows other improvements. William Bridges, in his book Managing Transitions that we showed you last week, he says, when you're trying to implement a big change in your company, he says, go around and gather ideas of all the other changes that people have been wishing for, because this might be a good time to actually, You think, well, you don't want to pile too many changes on top. Well, that may be true, but a time of upheaval is a time of creativity, and it's a time of when things can be changed for the better because there is some flexibility. So it is an opportunity to bring more creativity, and I'm sure that happened with Joseph. I'm sure that as he did this new thing of stockpiling grain, technology moved forward and relationships moved forward, and a lot of things were better because of that. Often, let's see, where are we? Take time to rest, trusting in God. That's true for any part of transition, really. Take time to prepare for the new future. Let's see, from 2009 to 2014, I was taking online classes on the side in computer science while I was continuing the mission work, and that made my transition to America a lot easier as I was able to get a job in computer science. This time brings you closer to God if you let it, so that time of upheaval and confusion and chaos is a great time to draw close to God, so let God pull you close to Him during that time. We want to learn from the past but not get stuck in it. We want to live in the present, and we want to prepare for the future but not obsess about it. So it's easy to get stuck in any one of those three things depending on your personality. And we just need to keep a balance. And then talking about beginnings. When you trip up after a change, it may reveal ways of thinking that you need to let go of. Idealism about a past situation, or hypersensitivity because of past pain. I had a guy at work that was really rude to me about a month or two ago, and I kind of asked, I made an appointment with him. I was like, can you meet me in this conference room? He was like, well, if you think it's important. And so so it was really good. We sat and talked to each other, and he was like, oh, I feel like a fool for what I said. He said, in the past I had a micromanager that was kind of always on my case about every little thing, and so I was just kind of hypersensitive, and I was afraid you were going to do that. And I said, okay, well, thanks for telling me. I'll try to, keep my distance and not check on you too much or anything like that. So that's, something from his past, that an old way of thinking that was making it hard to succeed in the present. And plan for extra collaboration with new people, because only through shared experiences can you build relationships. You can't expect everybody to really work together well at first, but spend that time. Show mercy to others, remembering you don't have enough information to judge them yet. I should have said to judge them. And don't judge yourself when Jesus would not judge you. So here's an example of how it's hard to have new beginnings and why you need to be patient with yourself. Okay, so here's a new beginning in Papua New Guinea. This is the kind of thing we heard all day. So everyone repeat after me how to say good morning. Say, Malatom Tom Dewa Dewana. Okay, for ouch, my leg is hurting. Ayua. I love that sentence because there's no consonants, only vowels. So. All right, then when I got to the telecom industry, GPRS MS, which is IMSI attached to GPRS services or to GPRS and non-GPRS services, performs location registration by the routing area update procedure only when in a network of network operation mode 1.
Don't make us repeat that.
I won't. But, those same headaches came back when I, got into this industry, and until you start to understand what they're talking about, right? So, again, be patient with yourself. Take time to rest. Shift your purpose, as William Bridges says, from the goal to the process of reaching the goal. Don't be upset at yourself because you're not where you want to be. Realize that, try to enjoy the journey. Try to realize that that's all God is asking you to do, is take one step at a time. And I'll pass it over to Diane with this verse. May you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, long, high, and deep His love is. May you experience the love of Christ. God loves you, and if you realize that, then you'll be patient with yourself and be able to get through those hard transitions.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start moving. The section on moving. But we might not get to all of it today, and that's totally fine. We can send some of it to next week. But moving and job changes often go together. A lot of times when a person has a job change, they end up moving for the job change. This is a quote from my daughter, but she says, your GPS says it will take you 15 minutes to get to church. Set aside 25 because you're in a transition. And I loved that perspective from her. She's had so many transitions herself. You know, that understanding that transitions, everything takes longer. Everything, you do have to be so much more patient with yourself and with other people. When you're in a routine and you're in your home that you're used to and your job that you're used to, you know which hallway to turn down, you know which office to go to, you know who to talk to about this and who to talk to about that. You're in a new thing and you don't know anything. It's like being a baby all over again. You know, you're not competent anymore. And sometimes people get so frustrated with that stage of incompetence. And everything takes longer, just like she said. So having patience with yourself. Let's see here. So 1 in 4 U.S. adults have moved within the country to another location in the past 5 years. And the average adult will move residences at least 11 times. And so that's a lot of moving. That's similar to the job transitions statistics. And Americans seem to move the most out of almost anyone in the world. Like if you look at statistics for other countries, they're not nearly as high as what we have here. Huh?
And I just want to say that, I mean, she's going to kind of focus on if you're moving, but these statistics also mean that the people in your life are going to move away from you, too.
Yes.
And a lot of the things that she says will apply to that also.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first moved to Littleton, this lady said, well, it's nice to meet you, but I'm not going to make good friends with you because everybody I do leaves.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes. And I've known people who have been like that, who just haven't wanted to invest because they're so tired of people leaving.
Really get invested.
Yeah.
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 And we kind of felt that way a little bit when we just lived 1 year in Arkansas. You know, we were like, well, we're only here for a year, but we had to invest,
right,
even for that year. So.
Yeah, and that was something that we really made a choice about, because when we got there, it kind of felt like, well, what's the point? We're just here for 10 months. We weren't even there for a full year. But we knew that we would not be happy if we did not invest in people. And we reminded ourselves that we've had people that we have had relationships with for years and years and years, that we'd only been around for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that, that it's important to go ahead and invest in people.
That's so true.
So this is a concept when we started the transitions class, and we were talking to our kids about it, because our kids have been to classes on transitions because of their cross-cultural moving. And they said, when are you going to talk about the raft, Mom? And I thought, well, if they remember the raft after 3 years, we better talk about the raft. And this is a great place to do it, because it really applies a lot to when you're going to move or when people are moving away from you. So each of these letters stands for something. The first letter, R, stands for reconcile. And we talked about that at some of the very beginning classes, how when you're ending a certain phase of your life, or you're ending a certain time in a location or something like that, then it's so important to take stock of your relationships. And really the R and the A are both for relationships. Because you want to look around and you want to say, is there anyone that I need to reconcile with here? You don't want to leave, like Marcus said with the work transitions, you don't want to leave a mess behind in your workplace. You also don't want to leave relationship messes behind. That's not healthy, and it's not what Christ calls us to. When he calls us to be light and salt and yeast, he's not calling us to leave relationship messes behind. And so this R can be really hard, actually. And there's several things that Jesus says about reconciling. And Marcus mentioned earlier that this also can have to do with a lot of different transitions. But I think about the transition to death, when we are transitioning to our final home in heaven, and this is the final move that we're all going to make, right? I've known people who, when they find out that they are dying, they did this. They said to themselves, who do I need to talk to and make things right? And that is a great thing to do when you know that that final transition is coming. But when you're moving also, it's a great thing to do. Jesus talks about if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar, and you remember somebody has something against you, you leave the sacrifice there, you go and be reconciled to that person. And we should live like this all the time. But I think that when we're leaving a place, it's an important time to kind of, like I said, take stock of those relationships and say, is there anyone here that I've hurt that I need to say sorry to? Is there anyone that has anything against me? And can I make that right in some way?
Not to be a wet blanket here, but you have to be aware if you try to reconcile with someone, they may not want to reconcile with you.
Yes, and let me get to the next slide because we're going to talk about that because that's absolutely true. And this is really this is talking about, does somebody have something against you? And you can go and say sorry to somebody and they can say, get lost. You have no control over that. And God talks about living at peace with people in as much as it depends on you. And so I think that there is a closure that can happen just by knowing that you did what you could to reach out to that person, and maybe God will work on that person along the way, but at least you did your part. Don't pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you're honorable. Do all you can to live at peace with everyone. That doesn't mean you are going to live at peace with everyone. Did Jesus live at peace with everyone? Absolutely not. There were all sorts of people that did not like him, did not want to see him, and were not going to be reconciled to him, who have chosen to not be reconciled to him. And yet, we are to let go of that anger and let go of that desire for revenge. If you can leave a place saying in your heart, wow, that person really hurt me, but I wish them well. And I wish for them to be reconciled to God and for them to have all of the success and all of the good things that life can give them. Then that is a closure, and that is a letting go of anger, and that allows you to move on in the new place. But if you're just taking your anger with you, and you are going to this new place across the country, but you are still holding that anger inside of you, you can be in another place and still think about that person every day and think about all the things you wish you could have said to them to hurt them or whatever it is. You've got to be able to let that go. And that's a process, and it can be an extended process. I've heard that anger is like an onion in your heart. You peel it, you cry, and then there's another layer. And you peel it and you cry, and then there's another layer, and you peel it and you cry, and you keep working at it like that. But we need to be able to let go of that. Jesus calls us to such a standard of this, loving people who have hurt us, loving people who have persecuted us. And that's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean that we trust them and we go and marry them or let them live with us or whatever that is. But we can love them in that we wish them well. And we wish them the very best that they could have in a right relationship with God. And I think that Jesus calls us to that standard, and it's crazy hard to do. And I understand that. I've had that onion in my heart that I've had to peel and cry and peel and cry and peel and cry and fought a daily battle with anger from across the world. With people that I wasn't living with anymore. But I still felt that, carried that anger with me, and that I had to fight to get rid of that. And it is a battle, and it is something that you have to work hard to do. But it's so important for transitions, because if you want to have a new beginning, just like Marcus's workmate that was carrying his anger at his old boss into his next job, it is going to affect how you live. And it's going to affect how you treat people. And it's going to affect how you trust people. And it's so important that you do that hard work along with God and pray to him and just fight that battle alongside him. Okay, the A is affirm. So you're getting ready to leave a place, and you've taken stock of these relationships, and you've thought, who do I need to be reconciled to, or who do I need to let go of anger against? Well, now it's time to think, who do I need to affirm? This is such a wonderful way of breathing life into a place where you're leaving. And we've had people do this for us, that they've left us, and they have taken the time to affirm us and to affirm our place in their lives. And it's meant so much to us, and it's influenced who we became and what we continued doing because they took the time to do that. When we, let's see here, Jesus, when he left his disciples, he took time to do this. He took time to say, I've loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. I no longer call you slaves. You're my friends. I've told you everything the Father told me. You didn't choose me. I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. And I think that's so special that Jesus, he's getting ready to die. He takes the time to affirm his relationship with his disciples and to let them know that he loves them. And that's something that can be like such a powerful thing. When you leave someplace, or when someone is leaving you, to take that time, write them a note, tell them, you meant something to me in this way. I try to encourage my kids to do this when they're leaving a school, to talk to the teachers that mattered and let them know, you mattered to me. I know you worked so hard for this, and I learned from you, and what you did made a difference. And that is a good way of leaving things tidy. You know, you don't want to leave a mess, then be reconciled. Take the time to affirm other people. And not just take time to affirm the people, but take time to affirm the place in your life and that season of your life. And this is something that you can do one-on-one with God. You can just sit down with him and you can say, God, I want to thank you for this season in my life, this place in my life. I want to thank you because I learned this from it, because this person came into my life who wouldn't have come into my life otherwise. And even if it was a painful time, look for the ways that God was teaching you through that time. Look for the times that he was influencing you for good. And take the time to affirm that season of your life in your mind. And that can even help you to have a new beginning that is good, because that hope that you carry from knowing that God has been working all along helps you to know that he's going to work in the next place and in the next season, that there's going to be more special people. There's going to be more life lessons that God is going to teach you. He's not done, and he's going to continue being who he has been for you. And it is 5 till 10. Shall we wrap it up here, and then we start with F next week? Does that sound good?
Okay.
Next week we'll talk about the F, which is farewell and saying goodbye. And then next week we're also going to be talking about transition clusters. Like oftentimes transitions will come in multiples. Okay, and navigating that, because that can be very, very difficult to navigate. Sometimes you're getting married and you're graduating from school and you're moving and you're getting a new job and it's all at the same time. That can be a lot. And then we're going to be talking about faith transitions. And then the last class is just going to be growing towards holiness, the inner transition that God is creating for all of us. So thank you guys.
Thanks a lot.